The debris field was still singing. That was the first thing Admiral Vosketheren noted in his official log. Not the scale of the destruction, not the tactical implications, not the 17 distinct hull signatures his sensors had already cataloged from 6 different star empires. The first thing he recorded was the sound, because the wreckage was emitting something. A low, sustained harmonic resonance, cycling through frequencies his instruments had no category for, and it had been doing so continuously for what his crew calculated to be 4 of this system's planetary rotations. 4 days. The wreckage had been singing for 4 days before anyone came to look at it. He did not yet know what that meant. He did not yet know that the singing was not a malfunction. He closed his log, looked out at the field of broken warships hanging in the dark between this star and its 3rd planet, and said something his crew would later remember as the last moment of certainty any of them would ever feel. Begin the survey carefully. 43 standard cycles before that moment, the hegemony of Velsarath had sent its 7th expeditionary armada to the coordinates designated in 14 separate interstellar agreements as the boundary of Sol system quarantine space. The 7th armada was not a punitive force. It was a statement. 312 warships, including 4 Throne-class dreadnoughts whose combined mass exceeded that of some moons, representing the manufacturing output of 11 worlds across a span of 60 years. They were not the first. That was the detail Vosketheren kept returning to as his survey teams moved through the debris. The Velsarathi ships were the most recent, destroyed perhaps 8 months ago by his estimate, based on radiation decay and the deterioration of organic materials still sealed inside pressurized compartments. But the field was older than 8 months, far older. Some of the wreckage at the deeper layers, closer to the planet, showed blast scoring and metallurgical stress fractures consistent with weapons platforms that hadn't been manufactured in a century and a half. Someone had been sending fleets here for 150 years, and something had been destroying them. Admiral, his sensor chief, a young Kethani female named Uvara, spoke without looking up from her console. Her voice had the specific flatness of someone performing professionalism over something she did not want to feel. I have confirmed 14 distinct hull construction signatures, cross-referencing with the interstellar registry now. And Velsarath, the Dominion of Or, the conclave of shared worlds, the Throne Collective. She stopped, started again. The Murath hegemony. The bridge went silent. The Murath hegemony had been a military superpower for 3 centuries. It had not lost a war in living memory. It had sent 4 fleets to the outer boundary of Sol space over the past 80 years, each fleet larger than the last, and each time, the hegemony had announced to the broader interstellar community that the human problem had been resolved. Vosketheren was looking at the 14th distinct wreckage signature in a debris field that stretched across a volume of space 200,000 kilometers wide, and not one of those 4 fleets appeared to have survived. What is the 3rd mystery, Uvara? She looked up then, Sir. You said 14 hull signatures. You've named 5 empires. There are 9 more. What is the 3rd mystery? She hesitated. The configuration of the wreckage, sir, the spatial distribution. She pulled up a holographic map, and the field resolved into a 3-dimensional scatter pattern across the bridge. The ships weren't destroyed in a battle formation. They weren't destroyed from a central point. The damage vectors come from everywhere. Some ships were destroyed from within. Some were destroyed from outside, but the angles are inconsistent, like the attacking vectors change direction mid-engagement, which isn't physically possible for any weapons platform we've ever cataloged. She paused. And some of them have no discernible cause of destruction at all. The hulls are simply open, split apart, like something inside them decided to leave in a hurry. Nobody spoke. Outside, the debris field continued its quiet, impossible singing. Vosketheren had not wanted this assignment. He was 73 years old in Kethani Standard, old enough to remember when the Sol quarantine had been a theoretical consensus rather than a physical wall, old enough to have heard the first intercepted transmissions from the third planet, old enough to have read the original xenobiological surveys that had described the dominant species there as pre-spaceflight, biologically fragile, politically divided, and demonstrably incapable of organized interstellar resistance. That survey was 112 years old. He kept thinking about that number, 112 years. The survey had been conducted by a Vel-Sarathi probe team, reviewed by a joint committee of 6 civilizations, ratified as accurate by consensus, and then used as the foundational justification for every subsequent decision about how to handle humanity. Pre-spaceflight, biologically fragile, politically divided, incapable of organized resistance. 14 empires had read that assessment and sent their fleets to verify it. The fleets were now in pieces around him. He pulled up the original survey on his personal display and read it for the 4th time since entering the system. The probe team had been thorough, methodical. The humans they'd observed remotely, carefully, at enormous distance, were exactly what they described. Small, short-lived by galactic standards, prone to violence against each other, dependent on chemical combustion for energy, armed with projectile weapons that would struggle to damage an unshielded scout vessel. The survey was accurate. He was beginning to think it had also missed something so fundamental that accurate was worse than useless. "Sir, Yuvara again." She had the same careful voice. "We've recovered an intact data core from one of the Murath vessels, approximately 60 years old. Can you read it?" "We can. It's a bridge log." She looked at him directly now, and he could read something in her expression that he hadn't seen from her before. "Do you want me to play it on the bridge or privately?" He understood the question. "Privately," he said. "My ready room, bring it yourself." The log began mid-sentence, which meant something had already happened before the recording started. The Murath bridge crew was speaking in their own language, a clicking, tonal language that his translation matrix rendered into Kethani Common with about 70% accuracy, which was enough. The voice was the Murath fleet commander, a rank designation that translated roughly as one who carries the final word. "Confirmed total destruction of the advance wing. I say again, the advance wing is gone. 14 vessels. They were inside engagement range for less than 4 minutes. A second voice. "Commander, the energy signatures aren't consistent with any weapon in our database. The readings suggest." "Forget the readings. What do you see on visual?" A long pause, long enough that Vosketheren found himself leaning forward slightly. I see ships coming toward us that should not be able to move. Several of them are on fire. Commander, there are ships approaching us that are structurally compromised and on fire, and they are still accelerating." Another pause. "Are they trying to surrender?" "No, Commander, they are attempting to ram us." The third mystery from Yuvara's report surfaced in Vosketheren's mind. Some hulls split apart as though something inside them had decided to leave in a hurry. He thought about that now in a different way. He thought about it and felt the temperature of the room drop by something that had nothing to do with the climate controls. The log continued. "Evasive action, all ships evasive." An impact, a long stretch of static, then the voice again, quieter. "They rammed us. A burning ship rammed us. The crew would have known they had less than 30 seconds of life support remaining." A pause. "They used those 30 seconds to accelerate into us." Silence on the recording for what the timestamp indicated was 2 minutes and 17 seconds. Then the commander's voice, very quietly, "What are these things?" The log ended. Vosketheren sat in his ready room for a long time after that. He thought about the humans he'd read about in the original survey. Biologically fragile. He thought about how that phrase now felt like a description of something the surveyors had observed from the outside and fundamentally misunderstood from the inside. Biologically fragile. As if the fragility itself might be the point. As if a species that knew it was fragile might have developed an entirely different relationship with the concept of expenditure than any species that was not. He thought about ships on fire, still accelerating. He returned to the bridge and told Uvara to continue the survey. They found the first survivor on the 4th day. Not a human. He hadn't expected humans. The survivor was Velsarathi, which meant she was technically one of his own Empire's citizens, though she looked at his crew with an expression that suggested she had reclassified all living things into categories that no longer included herself. She was in a sealed emergency compartment in the 2nd layer of the debris field, near the wreckage of a Velsarathi command vessel from the fleet that had been sent 8 months ago. She had been in that compartment for 8 months. Her name was Sedek, and she had been a tactical officer. She would not come out of the compartment voluntarily. They had to cut through the outer seal and physically carry her to the medical bay, and she did not speak for 2 days. When she finally spoke, Vosketharan was there. "How many ships came with you?" she asked without looking at him. 47, he said. She nodded, once slowly like someone confirming a death. "How long have you been in that compartment?" "I stopped counting after the 1st month." She paused. "I kept waiting for rescue. I kept thinking someone would come." Another pause. "When your ships appeared, I thought for a moment I thought you were them, coming back." "Who?" She looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were the pale amber of Velsarathi high caste, and they were completely empty of the things eyes were supposed to hold. "Humans," she said. "I thought you were the humans, coming back to finish the survey." He let the silence sit for a moment. "What survey?" "They weren't attacking us," Sedek said. Her voice was absolutely level, and that levelness was the most disturbing thing he'd heard in 4 days of disturbing things. The 7th Armada entered the system and began combat operations per standard protocol. We had overwhelming numerical superiority. The humans, there were almost none of them. A handful of spacecraft, old ones by our standards, visually primitive. She stopped. And they didn't fight back, not the way we expected. They retreated, pulled back, drew us in deeper into the inner system, past the 4th planet's orbit, past the 3rd planet's orbit's leading edge, and we followed because why wouldn't we follow? We had 312 warships and they had 31. We followed. She closed her eyes. It wasn't a retreat. I know that now. It was a measurement. They were measuring us the whole time, what our response time was, what our targeting algorithms defaulted to, how long before we adjusted formation to account for gravitational variance, how we communicated internally. They were reading us like a book, and we were so busy reading them as primitive that we never thought to wonder what they were writing. Vosketharan said nothing. "On the 7th day," Sedek continued, "they stopped running, and everything we'd done during those 7 days was used against us by the people who had planned for exactly that behavior." She opened her eyes. "It wasn't 31 ships. Those were just the ones they let us see, and the humans operating them weren't soldiers, Admiral. They were researchers. They were cataloging our response patterns. The people who actually ended the 7th Armada were different people entirely. People we never detected until it was over." The singing of the debris field pressed against the hull of his ship. "How did you survive?" he asked. "I was on a ship that wasn't worth destroying," she said. "I think they let me survive on purpose. I think they wanted someone to go home and explain what happened." A pause. "I've been trying to work out why. Why would they want that?" Vosketharan had an answer that he didn't offer her. He was beginning to think he understood why. He was beginning to think the humans had been sending messages for 150 years, and the messages had been the wreckage, and no one had known how to read them. This was the moment, sitting across from a hollow-eyed survivor in a medical bay that smelled of recycled air and antiseptic, that Vosketharan's understanding of the last 150 years completely rearranged itself. He had assumed the debris field was the record of human victories, proof of capability, a deterrent accumulated over time. But Sedek's account forced a reinterpretation so severe it felt physical, like something tilting under his feet. The debris field wasn't a deterrent. It was a curriculum. 14 empires had come to this system, and the humans had allowed just enough survivors to escape each time to carry information back, specifically calibrated information, specifically chosen survivors, a deliberate signal transmitted in the language of catastrophic loss. Come here. Learn something. Tell the others what you learned. And then the next empire would come. And they would have heard the lesson from the previous empire. And they would think, as the Velsarathi had thought, as the Murath had thought, as 11 other civilizations had thought, that the lesson was about the danger. That the lesson was, do not come here or you will be destroyed. None of them had understood what the lesson actually was. Vosketharan pulled up his own mission parameters and read them with new eyes. He had been sent to the Sol system because the Velsarathi Governing Council had reviewed the destruction of the 7th Armada and concluded that a smaller, observation-only force was necessary to assess what had happened before any further action was taken. 47 ships, minimal weapons configuration, explicitly non-aggressive posture. The humans had never seen anything like that from the outside. 14 empires had sent overwhelming force. The Velsarathi had finally sent something different. He needed to understand whether that difference had been noticed. Sedek, he said, in 8 months in that compartment, did anything visit you? Did anything come close to the compartment? Did you hear anything, see anything, detect any presence near the wreck? She hesitated. The hesitation itself was the answer. Something came on the 43rd day, she said. I heard it on the hull. A physical presence, magnetic contact, I think, through the compartment wall. Something moving along the exterior of the ship. She paused. It was there for 11 minutes. Then it left. I assumed it was debris contact, thermal contraction. You're a tactical officer, he said. You don't assume debris contact. A long silence. No, she said finally, I don't. Someone had been monitoring the compartment. Someone had known she was alive. And in 8 months they had come once to check and they had left her there. Not as cruelty, not as oversight, as a choice. Everything I thought I understood, Vosketharan realized, was looking at the back of something. The front of it is still in shadow. He recorded a message to the Governing Council that evening. He chose his words with the precision of someone diffusing a mechanism he didn't entirely understand. The debris field is not a battlefield, he said into the recorder. It is a library. I believe the humans have been aware of every fleet we've sent here, beginning with the first contact approximately 140 years ago. I believe they have been studying us for that entire period. I believe the survivors from each engagement were allowed to survive. I believe the tactical data they carried home was curated by human intelligence before release. He paused. I do not yet know what they want from us. I do not know what they've been preparing for, but I believe we have been misidentifying the nature of this situation for 140 years. We called it a quarantine. I am no longer confident the quarantine was ours. He scented. Then he went back to the bridge and told Uvara to take the ship to 60,000 kilometers above the 3rd planet and hold position. Hold position. She couldn't keep the anxiety out of her voice. Admiral, if we enter close orbit. I said 60,000 kilometers. I said hold position. He looked at her. I want them to see us clearly. I want it to be obvious that we're not maneuvering for attack. I want them to see that we're waiting. What are we waiting for? To find out if they'll respond to something other than a weapons platform. The response came 11 hours later. Not a transmission, not a weapons lock. A single human spacecraft, small, old by the construction standards visible in the debris field. Absolutely unarmed by any reading his sensors could produce, rose from the 3rd planet's surface, climbed through its atmosphere, and matched their orbital position with a precision that required computational capability, several tiers above what the original survey had suggested humanity possessed. And stopped, 100 meters off their port bow, just stopped. The bridge crew did not breathe. "Do we have visual?" Vosketheren asked. "Yes, sir." On screen. The human craft was roughly cylindrical, with a segmented outer hull that showed significant wear. This was not a new ship. It had been used many times for many things. There was text on the hull in the angular written language humanity used, which his translation matrix had partially decoded over the past week from captured communications. He had it read the text on the hull. The matrix processed. The translation came back. It said, "We know you're different. Come down." There was a human waiting on the surface. A single person. Vosketheren had sent a shuttle with himself and Uvara and 3 security personnel, and when they landed in the wide open space the humans had designated a flat coastal region, temperate, no visible weapons infrastructure, though he had learned sufficiently not to trust the visible. There was one human standing in the open air. She was small. All humans were small, but this one was particularly so, shorter than his shoulder, narrow-framed, dressed in simple functional clothing with no ornamentation. Her biological age was difficult to estimate. Humans aged in ways that were hard to read externally, but he guessed she was somewhere in the middle third of a human lifespan. She looked at his delegation for a long moment. Then she said something in her own language, and his translation matrix worked in real time. "You waited 11 hours before responding. The other ones usually started shooting within 40 minutes. A pause. That's the most patience anyone's ever shown us." "We are not here to fight," Vosketheren said through the matrix. "I know." She had dark eyes that contained something he was still learning to read in human faces, something between amusement and exhaustion, and the specific quality of attention that belongs to people who have been watching something for a very long time. "You sent an observation force. Non-combat configuration. You've been sitting at 60,000 kilometers doing a debris survey for 4 days. You're trying to understand what happened here before you decide what to do about it." She paused. "We've been waiting 112 years for someone to do that." "What is your name?" Uvara asked. "Mara," the human said. "Commander Mara Sokolova, and you should know that every word of this conversation is being heard by approximately 900 of my colleagues, and the fact that I'm the one standing here instead of a weapons platform represents a consensus decision that took us 3 weeks of arguing to reach." She looked at Vosketheren directly. "So, what do you want to know?" He had prepared questions. He had a list. Tactical questions, political questions, historical questions. He put all of them aside. "The singing," he said, "the harmonic resonance from the debris field, what is it?" She looked at him as if he'd asked the right question. "The ships," she said, "are singing to us. It's a beacon protocol we installed in the wreckage of every vessel after the first conflict. A frequency we designed specifically to be detectable by any spacefaring species but not generated naturally. A signal that says, come look, come count, come understand what happened here before you make a decision." She paused. "You're the first delegation to come look without first attempting an attack. In 112 years, you're the first." The weight of that number settled across the delegation like gravity. "The others," Vosketheren said, "the 14 fleets, did you have to destroy all of them?" Myra was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. "We didn't have to, we chose to, every time." She held his gaze. "We need you to understand that, not as a threat, as a fact. We are very small and we are very fragile and we are very aware of both things and we choose to fight anyway, every time. That is a choice, not a reflex. We make it with our eyes open." "Why?" Uvara said. Her voice was very quiet. "If you can study us, if you can read us, if you understood what was coming, why not attempt negotiation from the beginning?" Mara looked at the young sensor officer with something that might have been compassion. "We tried," she said simply. 30 years before the first fleet arrived, we detected your probes. We sent signals. We transmitted in every format we could construct. We said, "We're here, we're aware, we'd like to talk." She paused. No one came to talk. The first thing anyone sent was a weapons platform. Yuvara said nothing. After the third fleet, Mara continued, we understood something about how the galaxy sees us. We understood that talking only works between parties who have already decided the other party is worth talking to. So we stopped trying to look like something worth talking to. We started trying to look like something worth being afraid of. She looked back at the debris field, invisible above the clouds but present in the way that large true things are always present. 112 years of that. And here you are, first ones who came differently, she exhaled. So, we're trying something different too. He spent 6 days on the surface. What he learned across those 6 days required him to continuously revise his mental model of the situation, and each revision made the model more complicated, not less. He met 3 of Mara's colleagues, a quiet engineer named Desai who spent most of their interaction watching Vosketharan with an attention he found difficult to interpret, a military historian named Babatund whose encyclopedic knowledge of interstellar warfare doctrine exceeded that of most Velsarathi military analysts, and a very young woman named Sona who appeared to be in charge of something that nobody explained to him directly. What does she do? He asked Mara on the 3rd day. She's the reason we knew your fleet was coming before you crossed the outer boundary, Mara said. And she's the reason we knew you were different before your second ship finished decelerating. She smiled slightly. We're not going to explain everything, Admiral. You understand. Calibrated release of information, he said. We learned from the best teachers. She gestured at the sky. He found, on the 4th day, the thing he hadn't known he was looking for. It was in an archive that Mara brought him to with the specific casualness of someone who has thought carefully about when to stop being casual. A room full of physical recording media, old, by human standards, representing the accumulated documented history of every contact event between humanity and the galactic community. The first contact, he said, reading the dates. You said you sent signals 30 years before the first fleet arrived. Yes, but the signals weren't answered. Correct. And after the first fleet, he stopped. He was reading a file that shouldn't have made sense, and it did make sense, and that was the problem. After the first fleet, you didn't send signals again. You sent back the fleet's own command codes, encrypted, on their own frequencies. He looked at her. You sent the first fleet's tactical doctrine back to their home empire, annotated. We wanted them to know we'd read them, Mara said. You wanted them to know you'd read them, but you sent it as a gift, not as a threat. You gave them back their own classified military doctrine with your annotations showing where their tactical models were incorrect. He stared at the file. That is not the behavior of a species that wants war. No, she agreed. But the second fleet came anyway. Yes. After being told, explicitly, that you had read and corrected their military doctrine. Yes. He stood in the archive and understood something that he suspected would change him permanently. The second fleet had come not despite the annotated doctrine, but partly because of it. Because receiving annotated corrections of your military doctrine from a species you'd classified as pre-spaceflight and fragile was more unacceptable than the implications of the gesture itself. Pride. Political pride, interstellar pride, the pride of civilizations that had built themselves on a self-image of superiority, receiving a polite correction from something they decided shouldn't be capable of issuing one. 14 fleets. Not because humanity was terrifying. Because humanity was humiliating, and the empires couldn't stop. You've known this, he said. You've known why they kept coming. Yes. And you've been ending those fleets, one after another, for 112 years, as a kind of, he searched for the word, as a lesson that nobody was reading correctly. We were hopping, Mara said quietly. that eventually the lesson would change. Into what? She looked at him steadily. Into this conversation. On the 6th day, Sona, the young one, the one nobody had explained, came to find him alone. He was sitting near the coast watching the star his people called Sol Primary arc toward the horizon, and she came and sat beside him without asking permission, which he'd noticed was a fundamentally human quality, the assumption that proximity was acceptable until told otherwise. She didn't tell you everything, Sona said. I assumed that, he said. We have ships, she said it simply, watching the sunset. Not the 31 you saw, not the few hundred you've estimated from what we've let your sensors read. We have been building for 100 years. Everything the 14 fleets taught us, materials science, propulsion, weapons doctrine, structural engineering from 14 different technological traditions, we absorbed it. Every conflict taught us something. We got better each time. She paused. We're not the species from the original survey anymore. How many ships? He asked. She named a number. He said nothing for a long time. Why are you telling me this? He finally asked. The calibrated release of information, why tell me this now? Because we need you to understand something that Mara wasn't sure how to say, Sona said. We don't want to use them, not a single one of those ships. That's not what they're for. She turned to look at him with an expression that reminded him suddenly of Sedek's hollow amber eyes, but reversed. Where Sedek's eyes had been emptied, this girl's were full of something with weight. They're for after. For when the conversation you and Mara started today either works or doesn't. If it works, we never need them. If it doesn't, she shrugged, with a human casualness that now struck him as the most precisely calibrated gesture he'd ever seen. If it doesn't, number 15 would be different. Understood. He understood what the debris field was finally, completely. Not a library, not a deterrent, a waiting room. Humanity had been sitting in this system for 112 years, being attacked by the galaxy's greatest empires one after another, studying each one, absorbing each one, getting stronger with each one, and accumulating an arsenal they hoped with what appeared to be genuine sincerity they would never have to use, waiting for the day someone came to talk instead of fight. They had been waiting for him. Specifically, not him as a person, but him as a possibility. The possibility that the galactic community would eventually produce one delegation willing to arrive without weapons ready. He looked at the number Sona had given him and thought about what 14 empires would do if they received it. He thought about the arms race it would trigger. He thought about the political pressure that would mount across the interstellar community when it became known that Earth had spent a century quietly building while being attacked. Does Mara know you told me? He asked. Yes, Sona said. We argued about it for 3 hours this morning. And she agreed. She said, Sona paused, something flickering across her expression that might have been fondness, might have been grief, might have been both. She said if we can't trust the first person who came differently, then we've already lost the part of ourselves that makes winning worth anything. He filed no report that night. He sat with the weight of the number, and the weight of the debris field singing in orbit, and the weight of 14 destroyed fleets, and 112 years of a species waiting for permission to stop fighting, and he made a decision that he understood had no clean ending. In the morning, he told Mara what he was going to do. I'm going to recommend to the Governing Council that the quarantine designation be reclassified, he said, from containment to protected status. I'm going to recommend that Sol system be treated as sovereign territory under interstellar law, which would prohibit military incursion by any signatory empire. He paused. I want you to understand that this recommendation will not be popular. There are factions in the Vel-Sarathi Council who will argue I've been manipulated. There will be pressure to send another fleet to verify my conclusions. We know, Mara said. There is a real possibility the Council overrides me. We know that too. And if they do? She looked at him with the dark, heavy eyes of someone who has answered this question. So many times it has carved grooves in her. Then we'll be here, she said. We'll still be here. We've waited 112 years. We can wait more." She paused. "But Admiral, I want you to take something with you." She handed him a physical object, a small, flat piece of worked metal with human writing on it. He had his matrix read it before he left the ground. It read, "We never stopped sending signals. We just ran out of frequencies you could hear." He carried that piece of metal back to his ship. He carried it through 47 days of transit back to Velsarathi space. He carried it into the governing council chamber and set it on the table in front of 31 senior administrators and military advisors, and said nothing until they'd all read it. He carried the memory of Sedek's hollow eyes and Mara's full ones, and a number that made him understand the precise meaning of the word restraint. He won the recommendation by 6 votes, the smallest possible majority. 6 votes out of 31 between a policy that might end a 100-year cycle of violence and the next fleet. He never knew whether 6 votes was enough. What happened next, whether the council held, whether other empires followed the reclassification, whether the ship Sona had described ever launched, was not recorded in any document his own civilization made public. History moved slower than catastrophe and faster than hope, and the interstellar community was not one thing but many things pulling in different directions at once. What was recorded in the official archive of the Velsarathi Governing Council, in a file that the public record marked as administrative and unremarkable, was a footnote in Vas Ketharan's final report, submitted 6 days after his recommendation passed. The footnote read, "The debris field has stopped singing. As of 300 this morning, the harmonic resonance from the Sol system contact zone ceased completely. I have no technical explanation for this. My sensor chief, Officer Uvara, suggests the signal was never a beacon for arriving ships. She suggests it may have been something else, a timer, perhaps, or a threshold indicator, and that the cessation marks not the end of a signal, but the completion of something we do not have sufficient data to name." I find I am unable to argue with her. What I know is this: somewhere in that system, a species spent 112 years being hunted by the greatest military powers in the known galaxy, and responded not by becoming a weapon, but by becoming something no one had a word for. Not stronger, not harder, something stranger than either. Something that held the number Sona gave me and chose for 112 years not to use it. Something that built 31 ships instead of thousands and put them where they could be seen, and hid the thousands where they couldn't, and waited. Waited for someone to count the 31 and think, there must be more. Waited for someone to ask why the more were hidden instead of deployed. Waited for someone to understand that a species capable of hiding that much strength and choosing not to use it is not a species that wants war. It is a species that wants, specifically and precisely, and with 112 years of terrible patience, to be understood. I do not know if I have understood them correctly. I suspect that is also the point. I suspect they knew, when Sona named that number, that I would spend the rest of my life wondering if I had understood it fully. I suspect they consider that ongoing uncertainty to be more valuable than certainty would be. I suspect that the humans have learned something in 112 years of being attacked that the rest of the galaxy has not yet learned, and that the lesson has nothing to do with weapons. I suspect the singing was for us, all of it. Every broken ship and every carefully chosen survivor and every annotated doctrine and every waiting moment was a signal, and the signal was not, "We will destroy you." The signal was, "We are still here. We are still here. We are still here. Come find out what that means." The debris field was silent now. And in the silence, 14 empires began, slowly, to understand that the species they had classified as pre-spaceflight and biologically fragile and politically divided and incapable of organized resistance had been, for 112 years, the most patient thing in the known galaxy. Not the strongest, not the most advanced, not chosen, not destined, not evolved for war. Just patient, just willing, just still there, every single morning choosing again. That was the thing no survey had ever measured. That was the thing no fleet had ever found a weapon for. Not the ships hidden from their sensors, not the absorbed tactical doctrine, not the annotated corrections, not the harmonic signal singing from a field of broken warships for 4 days before anyone came to look. The thing no empire had found a weapon for was simpler than any of it. It was the fact that somewhere on the third planet of an unremarkable star, someone woke up on the 10,000 and something morning of a 112-year siege, looked at the number of fleets that had come and the number of people they had lost and the number of years still stretching ahead of them, and decided to get up anyway. And then did it again the next morning. And the one after that. Until the morning the singing stopped, and a shuttle rose from the surface, and a very small human in plain clothes stood in an open field and said, "You waited 11 hours. That's the most patience anyone's ever shown us." As if patience, simple, irrational, biologically inexplicable patience, was the rarest thing in the galaxy. As if they had been waiting for someone to show it. As if they had all